Welcome to It's a Grand Life, where our mission is to be a voice for grand families and kinship caregivers everywhere. Did you know that in the United States alone, there are 2.3 million grandparents raising their grandchildren? 2.3 million. It's a Grand Life is committed to making a difference for those kids. That's why we have the podcast, a Facebook group, and the Grand Fund. The Grand Fund, which is a 501c3 which was launched in June of 2024, provides financial assistance to grand families, including shelter, food, clothing, and household needs. Grand families are in every neighborhood, in every city, every tribe, and territory nationwide. If this is you or someone you love, we're here for you, and we welcome you to join us on this mission. Our goal is to offer hope and resources to help you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review. You can also join our Facebook group. Just search for it under It's a Grand Life. And your reviews, comments, and sharing of our podcasts help us reach others that need assistance. Welcome to another episode of It's a Grand Life. Hello, my name is Craig Nash. We'd like to welcome you to another It's a Grand Life. And you're absolutely going to be blessed today because we have got Caliendo from Las Vegas, Nevada, who is known as the maven of kinship care. She runs like the Walmart of everything regarding foster care and kinship care there in Nevada. And I have some friends who are part of the Grand Voice Coalition with me there from Generations United. And they have said, you've got to interview this lady. She's really got it going on. Ali, thank you so much for joining us here on It's a Grand Life.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, you have a long history of working with foster care families and kinship caregivers, but you uniquely put all of these services under one roof there in Las Vegas, and you've been, an inspiration to my friends. And I'm just hoping today during our talk that you can just inspire everybody who's doing kinship care and foster caregiving and thinking of running their own support group. How would you tell us your story, how you got started, and then what would you recommend for folks thinking of doing what you're doing?
Sure. So thank you again for having me. And Foster Kinship is the organization that I founded actually in 2011. But the story started earlier than that. It started when I first moved to Las Vegas in about 2009. And I was working with kids in foster care. And most of the kids that I was working with ended up being in kinship foster care. And I was just less familiar with the differences between traditional foster care and kinship foster care at the time, and very quickly saw that there were some big differences between how relatives were being supported, even in the foster care system versus our traditional foster families. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what got me started on this, was just the differences between if you're placed with grandma versus with a stranger foster parent, of which I am one. So I don't mean that negatively. I just mean it's just a stranger situation. Right. My family was getting paid and we were getting trained and reimbursed to care for the same child that if they were living with grandma wouldn't get the same support. So that's how I got started, is I just saw a real big difference. And then I saw some big barriers for families accessing equitable support. So kinship families weren't able to get licensed in a timely manner. There was barriers to getting reimbursement. The training, was hard to access. And I just felt so deeply touched because I saw that kids were doing better with their family, but that the relative caregivers, while they're of course stepping up out of love and it's your family and you're doing this great thing, it takes a lot out of you. It's very challenging to step in and raise your relatives' children with no support. Especially, I saw that relatives who were doing this work were just sort of needing way more help in order to not give up, basically, or not be able to do it because of, financial reasons, or the behaviors were so big. So that's how foster kinship got started, was really trying to create equity within our foster care system so that any child in foster care would get this access to the same resources. But of course, I quickly realized that the majority of kids in kinship care aren't in foster care at all. So our services from day one have always been for anyone parenting a relative's child, no
Wow.
matter what the relationship is to foster care. So, child can be in the system, out of the system. It doesn't matter to us. We believe that kinship families deserve the same support regardless. So, we started from day one with formal and informal kinship care being our target population. And we really started just by listening. So, it was just listening. It was just me for a really long time, and I didn't have any money. And so I just had support groups where I would sit and just listen and learn. And I learned so much from the families that came and shared their stories. And it was from those stories that we built our programming. So it wasn't, some sort of idea I had of what families needed. It was what families were saying they needed. And that's how we built it out. So we started with support groups, listening, and then we built from there based on what we were hearing the needs and the gaps were.
Well, Doctor, how did you handle the financial side of this? Because there's a huge gap between getting the foster care support and really not having foster kinship care support. And you're running an agency, and you have unless it's a not-for-profit mission where you're not concerned about paying your staff. How did you make the numbers work for something like this?
So are you talking about like the financial support
The
available to
financial side, to
Yeah.
provide all the support that I know you've got a large staff, how do you, and how did you make that work? That seems like the big hindrance to having everything under one roof, but you figured that out.
I did, but it's been years. So for the first 5 years of foster kinship, till about 2015 or 2016, early 2016, it really was just me listening and doing the work, mostly as a volunteer. I wasn't really able to pay myself. So I was just building because I'm so passionate about it, but it wasn't like what it is today. So I always encourage people not to look at what foster kinship is today in 2024, because it can feel overwhelming. Like there's no way I can do that. But actually you can do it, because the way we started was truly very humble and grassroots. And one of the things that I did to make it work was I created, it's called our resource locator tool. But essentially, I automated information for families so that no matter what type of family came through and needed assistance, this tool basically asks a couple questions about the family's age and zip code and the child and the relationship to foster care. And it will give the family all of the information they need legally, financially, what's in the community, and how to get support. So that I didn't have to have full-time staff answering the phone, because that kinship resource locator tool was really acting as an unpaid staff giving accurate information. And we still use it for years. And then I had a helpline. I started with a helpline, and I could only have it on a couple days a week for the first few years because I was working another job and just trying to build this. And then support groups. So those were the key things, is we wanted to give accurate information. We wanted families to have the information they needed to advocate for themselves and to understand how the systems defined them. So families needed the tools to understand, I am considered a formal caregiver. I am considered an informal caregiver. How are the systems in your area defining you, so you know exactly what to ask for, exactly what program to apply for, and exactly what you're entitled to get? And so using that, arming families with accurate information and supporting them emotionally, and in having a helpline, those three services are what got us to be able to build into the services that we have today. But those three services are key, and anyone can do them. I like to say anyone can, because it's doable and it's not that expensive. It was just, it was super. I mean, our budget was like $30,000 for a couple of years.
Really?
Yeah. So, and we're not there anymore, but I think anyone can do those basic core services for families, and you don't need a ton of money to give accurate information and to navigate the system and to provide emotional support.
Did you find that it has to be tailored per state? I mean, if it could, and so you've got to have everything tailored to Nevada where you are, and so all of the formal regulations and the informal regulations, and and when my wife and I became guardians of our granddaughter, I didn't know what kinship was. I knew what foster was. And so there's a whole glossary of terms you have to know, especially if you're trying to navigate the system. And did it take you a long time to get a handle on all this, and then to put your processes and protocols in place?
Yes. And I'm still learning. And I even went back and got my PhD while I was doing this to basically study this more formally, what every state was doing, how they're interpreting the federal laws, how state child welfare agencies are talking about kinship, because the definitions are some of the biggest issues. And if you are in any of the national kinship support groups on Facebook or anywhere else, you'll see that very well-intentioned folks meaning to support the person asking a question will provide information that's only specific to their jurisdiction or their state. And it's not necessarily accurate from where the person asking the question is coming from. And that, to me, I think we have to solve sort of nationally on advocacy. We need to encourage common definitions and common understanding of kinship families. And it's not kinship versus foster, because there are kinship foster families. And then there are, kinship families outside the system who may have guardianship like you have, like I have guardianship right now outside the system. But there are families outside the system that it's called something different. And so for Nevada, we figured out there's about 12 different types of kinship families. So if you actually get it down to the buckets, that's how specific it is. But we're in other states now. South Carolina has like 14. Minnesota, I think, has even more, depending on how the states define them. But once you know how to divide out the families based on the state's, policies, it's actually not that hard to get down to that granular level.
So, Doctor, when you are approaching a new market, let's say you're being called into Florida, you've got some friends. How do you go into a new market and assess the needs there and really come alongside the folks that are providing services there?
I think the most important thing is to find the actual grassroots organizations that are on the ground providing the real services. I'll speak very candidly. I think since there's more attention now to kinship navigation and there's more funding available, we're seeing big organizations who have been in child welfare start to pivot to go after the kinship money. And that isn't who's doing the work. Who's been doing the work for 20 years? Who's been doing the work without getting paid? Who's talking to the families? So I always look for the actual kinship organizations that are truly talking to families, listening to families, and I start there. And then you want to just support and equip people who are really, truly doing it and have lived experience and understand it, and then just give them the tools to understand the system versus helping the system understand kinship families. I mean, if that worked, we'd all be out of a job. So,
right. So you want to stay away from the bureaucratic institutions, and you'd rather work with the mom and pop that just feel that maybe they're in the situation like we're in, and they start taking care of their grands, and now they want to help their neighbors and folks like that. That's probably the ideal candidate for you.
That is. Yes.
Yeah. And I know you've got some of my friends coming to town this week that and they represent that. They have a heart as big as Huntsville, Alabama, and they're just trying to help their fellow neighbors who are in the same boat. And I'm just thrilled that you all are going to be working together. But if someone is in Kentucky or Idaho or Illinois or even Michigan, and they want to learn, how do we do this? How do we crawl before we walk and walk before we run? And can I partner with someone who's been successful at doing this, who's not into the large institutional programs, but want to help the boots on the ground folks like you were, that when you started, Doctor, all those years ago? Those are the type of folks that should reach out to you at Foster Kinship and see if you can partner with them to really get their program to the next level.
Absolutely. And because we've gone through the process of becoming evidence-based, which is insanely hard, and you wouldn't expect that grassroots organizations could get there, we're very happy to share now our model and the tools and all the things that we've learned along the way. And if it's a grassroots organization that maybe doesn't yet have partnership with the state to draw down those dollars, we want to provide our services pro bono so that we're equipping grassroots kinship organizations to be able to compete in this competitive environment now for kinship dollars, to go to the state and say, you should partner with us because we have a good model and we have lived experience. We know what we're doing. That's the goal that I have right now, is to make sure we're getting the resources for nonprofit kinship navigators into the hands of people who are already doing it.
Awesome.
That's what I want to see.
Not the corporate powerhouses or the
No,
government
because again,
bureaucracy.
if it worked, then we wouldn't be starting these grassroots organizations out of pretty much desperation. And, so no, I don't think we should be focused on that. I mean, everyone can learn and do better for kin, but the people who really have the heart for it are the ones that are not getting paid and not getting recognized. And they're the ones that are doing the best support of families emotionally. And emotional support is the number one thing that kinship families need. They need accurate information. They need emotional support. Of course, money is good and legal capacity and all those things. But without the heart, without emotional support, without understanding, it doesn't matter how much money you can give a family.
I'm just, amazed when I talk to folks across the country that are providing the care, whether they're in an institution or an organization like yours or just a startup. The heart that these folks have for their kin is just amazing. And, we have sometimes conference calls with folks all over the country that are doing this. And we're all from different places in life and different places in the country and different ethnic groups and different situations, but we don't have any of the division that we have in our country on those calls. So when you are talking about folks that are really want to make a difference, it's because they love their grandkids and their kin. And like our friend Bob out of California, I mean, he crying out loud, he's always on a plane flying to Sacramento to advocate for other families other than his own. That's because the love in his heart is just huge for folks in the same situation. And I think it's going to be through foster care and kinship caregivers that this country can come back together. Because if you get all of us in a room, there's a lot of positive stuff going on there.
That's such a good point, because I was just thinking about it yesterday with how hostile and divided our country is right now. We don't see any of that division in our support groups, in our work, none of it. Everyone comes together around a common goal, and that is more important than anything else. And it's so inspiring. And I feel so blessed to work in this space. This is the best group of people, I think, in our country. So yeah, I agree. This is how we lead the way.
And I'm so blessed to be able to talk to everybody like yourself. And just, I get off an interview, I'm like, man, what a wonderful person. And oftentimes you just feel this love, that goes back and forth. And if there's anything we need in the US right now, it is a little bit of love and going around, because this division, and if I see one more political commercial, I think I'm finding the nearest bridge and jumping. I mean,
I hear ya.
We've had enough of it. But when you started, I just love your philosophy of how you started foster kinship. You started with listening, and you sat down with the providers, the kinship caregivers, and just said, what really do you need? And this whole idea of having evidence-based outcomes. When I had a physical therapy clinic, we started working with some of the automotive providers here in Michigan, and we were the first ones to provide outcome data. And it was like, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls or something. They were just amazed that, you mean if we can actually get the physicians talking to the patients and the caregivers, that we can really reduce the length of stay? Yes, we can. But but you have to have the commitment to put in all those years where you couldn't even pay yourself to really learn, how can I make a difference in this space? And that's really what you've done. And that's why folks from across the country are reaching out and want to find out, doctor, how do we bring this to Idaho, to Michigan, to Illinois? And that's just so exciting. But how do you address the disparity, the discrepancy between the foster families who are able to get the resources and the kinship families that are not in some states? Because I know they're talking about money rolling in, but I'm not hearing a lot about that where I am. And how does that?
No.
So do you kind of guide folks to go on the foster side? Okay.
Well, so accurate information at the right time, so families make the best decision for them. So for some families, if they're on the sort of border of foster care and they have an option, which most families don't have an option, but if they have an option, you can go into kinship foster care, or you can do this through guardianship. What foster kinship does is just provide all the resources that happen if you do guardianship. Here's all the things that can happen if you do foster care, pros and cons on either side. And then the family can make the best decision for them. And every family comes from a different place and needs different things. And they just need the information to decide what's right. But a big piece of foster kinship's work is advocacy. So what we like to do is explain to the families the current rules of the game. Here's the board you're on. Here are the rules. Now, you have to understand the rules to play the game. But when you realize that some of the rules are unfair, that's where advocacy comes in. Like, we actually have to also be changing the rules of the game for kinship families at the same time we're teaching, here's what's going on. But also, yeah, we agree, this isn't fair. This feels very inequitable. This doesn't make sense that a child should have to enter foster care for you to receive financial support and training. So we're going to go out and advocate with a group. We call it the Kinship Advocacy Network. It's not a support group. It's caregivers that come together along these advocacy policy issues, and we advocate in administrative agencies here. We advocate at the state level to change laws. And then, of course, we participate in federal advocacy just to de-link resources from foster care and put them into kinship homes, because that's where the kids are. So we don't want to have everyone in foster care. We want the foster care resources to please be equitably given to any child who can't live with their parent. They all have similar needs. So why does it matter if they're in foster care or not? They're not living with either parent. Let's get them some support. So we do a lot of advocacy, and I think anyone doing a support program should also consider advocacy as a parallel process. Because if you're listening, you're going to hear a whole bunch of stuff that makes you cry, and you can't just get defeated. You have to say, okay, this doesn't seem right. Why isn't it right? Let's go figure out if we can make some changes. Now, advocacy takes years, and that's why you have to have emotional support and diapers and support groups and all those things to help families immediately. But those stories have to add up to some sort of change, or I think we're just never going to be out of this sad situation.
That is such a great point. It's a great mission and vision, but it does take time because you're dealing with government, and it takes forever to move the needle on. But you've been in this a long time, and you've seen the positive outcome that happens when you have your facts straight, when you've actually talked to the folks that need the support, and you can talk on both sides of the fence, whether they're foster or just kinship. How do you deal with kinship caregivers that are afraid to join the foster ranks? They don't want the governmental intervention. They've heard horror stories of times when foster folks came in and said that the current setup. I heard one case the other day where they said the room was too small. You can't have, little Johnny stay with you. The room is too small. Meanwhile, Johnny is thrilled to be staying with the grandparents or the relatives that love him. How do you deal with that?
Well, and for good reason, families don't want to get involved further in our governmental systems and in foster care. So their fears aren't completely unfounded. There are real risks to getting involved with foster care. And that's what we discuss when we discuss, here's what can happen on the foster care side. Here's what happens outside the system. And families have to make that decision for themselves. They will always have a foster kinship advocate walking alongside them, no matter what they decide. And we do a lot of advocacy to make sure they're treated fairly within the system, or, through the guardianship courts, whatever that looks like. But ultimately, families have to decide what works best for them. And when we see our systems mistreating families and misrepresenting what our policy and law is when it comes to placement and supporting families, that's where that advocacy piece has to always kick in. We also spend a lot of time educating child welfare professionals, because they make all the difference in a family's ability to stay together within the foster care system. If they understand some of the concerns and family dynamics and the needs, that can make all the difference. And when they don't, those families suffer. So we have to be bringing in our child welfare professionals to better understand kin and their needs and treat them with respect and differently from traditional foster parents, because traditional foster parents hey, I sign up for this. I'm going to do it willingly. I'm motivated. Whereas our families who get the middle of the night call, they need to be treated differently. And when they're treated like, well, they feel angry, they are not representing, it's like, yeah, they're angry. Their family system is collapsing, like in real time. Of course,
Right.
they have these big feelings about it. Like, we need to create space for that. So we also spend time trying to educate, because our foster care system, unfortunately, does have resources. And, some families need to access those resources. And if they're too scared, kids can suffer, because then kids don't have health insurance. They don't have, financial support. They're not getting to the right school. Then we're suffering in a different way. So there's just, when I think about it, there's so many systemic things that need to change for this to be right. But I have to focus one step at a time, or I'll get super overwhelmed.
Well, what you're doing is just inspiring, and it started with listening, and I just wonder if when you were thinking back to 2011, you have any idea where you would be right now, and
No.
where folks from other states are flying into Nevada to get trained in how to address their markets, and are you open for other groups to reach out and chat with you and partner with you in other states to try and
Yes.
bring the model that has worked so well in Nevada to other parts of the country, because it's so needed.
Yes, absolutely.
And when our show is produced, at the bottom, we're going to have your website and phone numbers where to get in touch with you and what have you. But if someone was, and the last question I wanted to ask you before I let you go, because I know you got a million things on your plate today, especially with those characters coming to town. God bless you.
That's right.
But if I was running a group here in Michigan, and I wanted to reach out to you and get the training and back support and what have you, what should I have in place before I reach out to foster kinship?
It does help if you have a 501c3 that you've already started, because that makes everything easier in terms of transferring just the tools to build something. If you don't yet have a 501c3 and it's something you're interested in starting, I can also talk to you about how you do that. And so it's not overwhelming, and that can't be a barrier. But it does help if you have an initial structure and you are already working with caregivers and you have the passion for it and some form of lived experience. Those things make all the difference.
I love that. So 501c3 is a great place to start, and it'd be great if you have some caregivers and have the lived experience. And that probably describes everybody except for the 501 that I talk to here at It's a Grand Life. But Dr. Ali Caliendo, thank you so much for being our guest here at It's a Grand Life. I hope you'll come back early and often and keep us posted on where you're going with this and what changes are happening around the country, because the work you're doing is so important. I serve on the Michigan Kinship Care Coalition, and we're always talking about how can we advocate for kinship as well as the foster families. And you have figured out the formula, and just really salute the work you're doing across the country. And thanks so much for being our guest here, and It's a Grand Life.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today for It's a Grand Life. It's a Grand Life provides vital content, regulatory updates, and subject matter experts that are committed to supporting the 2.4 million kids and their caregivers from every neighborhood, every city, every tribe and territory nationwide. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review. Every new subscriber and review helps us reach others that need assistance. As caregivers, we are united in purpose. We are driven by hope while providing strength for today and hope for tomorrow. We are truly making a difference while living the grand life. If you have a suggestion for a future episode, please reach out to us. But we'll see you next time for another It's a Grand Life. Thank you for joining us.